Hello, and welcome to School Health Presents, working with our exceptional individuals during the COVID-19 pandemic. This video is going to focus on the whole idea of sensory needs, what we can be doing at home to make sure that we're addressing whatever sensory needs our individuals might have. Now, realistically, there's a lot of things already around our house that actually can help us as we go through. When we're looking to address sensory needs, sometimes it's just the feel of something or being able to put our hands into something. If you are sitting with something like dried beans or rice around the house, those are things that actually will work well and work well in two areas. One, you could put them in a little bowl for the individuals to actually work their hands in. And as they're going through, if you've got individuals where you're trying to work some fine motor skills, you could actually have them spelling out words or letters within the beans or the rice as we go through. Work with your OTs on that. Contact the OT and say, what are some of the things you might recommend? There's also other types of things that we may have around the house that would work very well too. We may have different types of dough. You may have a Play-Doh or some other things. If you want to kind of move to the next level with that, I highly recommend Mad Matter. I know some of you already may have Mad Matter at home. What I like about Mad Matter is that first and foremost, it doesn't dry out. Secondly, if that child sneezes on it or coughs on it, to clean Mad Matter, you take that cleaning wipe and you wipe it down. And once you've wiped it down, one thing I always remind groups is take it in your hands and just rub it in the palms of your hands to get some of that excess liquid feel off of it. Why? Just because you don't want a child then picking it up and having it feel somewhat wet or react to it in an adverse way. What I also like about Mad Matter is the fact that it is wheat-free, gluten-free, and casein-free. And so therefore, when we're dealing with some exceptional individuals who may also have some specific allergies, it is not something that we need to be overly concerned with. Because one of our concerns is going to be when you're playing with any type of a dough, it's usually not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when it gets tossed into the mouth. This is not something that you want to encourage eating, but again, something that would not be restrictive if they accidentally put it in their mouths. You know, you can also make, just from flour, salt, and a few other simple ingredients, your own types of edible dough. You want to think of it mainly as designing a cookie base without putting in eggs or other thing that may carry additional bacteria. So that's another thing you may want to take a look at when you're talking about doughs. I also have people ask me about putty. For those of us of another generation, silly putty is still around. The only issue that sometimes we see with the silly putty is the fact that it tends to be a little bit oily texture-wise, and that might throw off some of our individuals. If you've got other putties sitting around the house, like a Crazy Aaron's putty, or some of you OTs in that, or some individuals that have been working with different types of putty may have TheraPutty. Please continue to use this. And again, if someone were to sneeze on it, wipe it down and let them continue to work with it, because it can be somewhat of a dual fold purpose when it comes to using a putty like this. Number one, it can be, again, that sensory outreach. It can be the way that, again, you're creating a relaxing environment within the context of the house. The second thing it can be doing is strengthening that grip, that pull as you go through, depending on the strength of the TheraPutty itself. Again, whenever you're dealing with things like this, work directly with your OTs. And OTs and PTs, thank you for what you're doing. I know so many of you right now are doing basically consults like this right over a video call of some type. So that's how to address things when we're looking at household items. Another thing you want to be aware of is the creation of edible blocks and edible counting pieces. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of us have Jell-O sitting around somewhere, whether it be sugar Jell-O or sugar-free Jell-O. I encourage you to go ahead and make up some Jell-O, but then use it in a different way. Perhaps have the Jell-O cut into little pieces, little squares, and spread around a plate. Do some counting exercises, do some pointing exercises, even make some different types of Jell-O and actually have identification of colors. Also, along that way, you can be practicing some of your speech too as you go through. What color is that? What shape is that? Put some of the Jell-O in little cookie cutters and have the Jell-O made into shapes. Do some creative things with Jell-O, and then as a reward at the end, guess what? You can eat the Jell-O. And so again, it's something that can be done at home, something that may already be in our pantry somewhere that we can use for a constructive way of approaching things. What are some other things that we want to be aware of when it comes to sensory? We always talk about sensory balls and what goes on. I've got here weighted sensory balls, which are great because you can squeeze them, but more importantly, there's a little bit of weight to them too. And so you can feel them even just holding it in your hand as you're resting. You can create, if you don't have these are sand filled, but it's a heavy duty rubber on the outside. If you don't have something like that, you again can create them with your beans, with your rice, and in simple things like a sock. Just tie the end of the sock together. You then are creating something that's weighted. Again, work with your OTs. I'm old school, so I'm going to tell you right off the bat, you should never be using any type of a weighted material on an individual that is more than 1/10 of their body weight. Why? We don't want to create other physiological issues for that individual. Use things that are appropriate, but weighted things can work. Weighted things can help. Even in the creation of a weighted lap pad, believe it or not, even though I've got some lap pads, simply a bag of rice on a lap can actually do some calming as we go through. So think about what you already have accessible, or when you're ready to take it up another notch, consider some of the things that we're discussing here, and you might see some recommendations from. Another thing when it comes to sensory feedback oftentimes has to do with things that we can chew. You've heard the term jewelry perhaps from time to time. There's different things like necklaces that can be worn, or even little bracelets that can be worn too. What I like about these is that, again, it can kind of blend in with what you're doing, what you're wearing, and the individual can still chew. But please be aware that some things are going to be thin. So if you've got a true biter, something like this may not be as strong as you'd hope. So there are some other things, both available in the market and things that we can create, and I'll get to the creation in just a second. This is something called the roller chew, and it is worn much like a necklace, can be carried down here. I've worked with a lot of individuals, especially at the secondary level, who actually like using this because it reminds them of some of the chains that athletes might wear. A little bit of a more durable chewing area here, and it also allows for finger fidgeting. Can be cleaned easily just using a wipe right on the surface of it. A little bit thicker to chew through. And what's great is if it were to get caught on something or somebody were to pull it, it's actually a breakaway mechanism here in the back, so it's not going to cause any choking hazards as we go through. So that's something that I also like to see. There's also different types of chews, whether you're putting a mouth chew in or chews that can actually fit on drawstrings, like on a hoodie. These are things that can go in the mouth, just again to maintain a sense of comfort as we're going through. Make sure that they are somewhat thicker though, a little more heavy duty as you're putting things through. As I mentioned, you can do some things around the house too that actually would work well when it comes to chewing. A couple of things right off the bat. If you've got an individual that tends to gnaw more, carrot sticks. Just kind of take the carrot sticks, make them a little bit more smooth. Not baby carrot sticks, because sometimes those baby carrots are too small to be munching on and holding at the same time, but a longer carrot stick. Even just take a carrot and cut it in half and kind of trim down the end so it's a little more rounded and can be put into the mouth. That's something that can be used right off the bat. So you want to think about things that are also going to be healthy for our kids. When it comes to other types of sensory devices, think too of things that can transfer later on, things that will be socially appropriate, and socially appropriate because of a couple of reasons. Number one, they're quiet and they can be easily put into a pocket. I love using different devices like this or like the finger squashes. Why? Because they are quiet. They can be carried in a pocket and used from time to time no matter what you're doing. So keep that in mind. What I want to give a caveat of are things that light up, because again, that might throw some students off or some individuals off, but it also draws attention to them. The other thing that is a very popular thing are tubes. Tubes can be great, but they're great when they're in outside areas or great when it's kind of a break time because they make a lot of noise and that can be very distracting, especially inside. Another thing, please be cautious of as we're going through cush balls. Watch where you're getting your cush balls from. And the reason I say that is there are some cush balls that are very good. They are actually made for individuals with exceptionalities, and understand the fact that certain products cannot be used within them. If you're not careful, you may get a cush ball, and the cheapest way to make a cush ball like this is actually to have latex built in. So you've got to make sure you've got a latex-free cush ball. That's why sometimes going to the dollar store just doesn't work. Another thing, if you're trying to get that type of connection with what you're doing, use an old-fashioned bristle brush, a softer brush, or something that has basically plastic types of tines that can be rubbed against the skin. We've seen this used with infants for years, but now pull those out. We know that for some individuals on the autism spectrum, brushing works well. It can also work for a lot of other individuals too. And speaking of devices with tines, if you have things like Aku rings, these can be used, again, just kind of for holding on as we're doing things, kind of carried around on the wrist inside the house, just for access. It's always important to remember that all of us have some degree of sensory processing issues. We just are able to process things in different ways. For some of our individuals with exceptionalities, they don't know how to process. So work with your OTs as you're going through things, but also come up with some ideas at home that can be used easily just to keep individuals calm.